Everyone, welcome to the Climate Statement 2022 webinar. For those joining us for the first time, welcome, and for anyone who's joined us for our webinars before, welcome back. Before we begin proceedings, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the Kulin Nations, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. And I would like to acknowledge and pay respects to traditional custodians of all the land that we are gathered on, all states and territories across Australia, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. We acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and contribution they make to this country. Today, from our experts from the Bureau of Meteorology will give a detailed look at Australia's climate, water, and notable weather events in 2022. We'll also learn more about Australia's rainfall, temperature, water resources, climate influences, and more information included in the Bureau's official record for the 2022 calendar year. Next slide, please. My name is Jordan. I'll be your moderator today. I'm joined by Katrina, who will be producing today's webinar. Together, we will make the webinar as interactive as possible. Before we start, may I ask for your attention as we cover off some housekeeping items. Next slide. With the current situation as it is in Australia, this webinar will be conducted from our respective homes and office spaces across the country. We're represented in a lot of states today, so please bear this in mind as we may encounter some technical issues during the broadcast, which you've already seen. Our broadcast today will run for 60 minutes with plenty of time allocated for questions, and this webinar is also being recorded and the video will be shared with you via email. For first-time webinar attendees, please see some helpful tips on your screen. Next slide, please. Most importantly, please note the Q&A icon where you can send through any questions or feedback for the presenters during the presentation. And we're going to try and answer as many as possible. We've got a bunch of people standing by to answer them and our two experts as well. It's the little icon with a speech bubble button that has a question mark in it at the top of your screen. And when you press it, it will be underlined and a little side panel will open up. Thank you to everyone who's sent in questions during the registration process. We've used them to help shape the content you'll see today, and we'll get through as many as we can. Finally, I'm delighted to introduce you to our presenters. The next slide, please. From the Bureau, we have Dr. Stephanie Jacobs and Dr. David Wilson. Now, Dr. Stephanie Jacobs is a senior climate risk specialist who undertakes climate projects varying from understanding historical relationships to climate change predictions. And Dr. David, who we've already had a little chat with already, is part of the Bureau's climate team where he reports on climate drivers, long-range forecasts, and share this information with users. We also have Katrina and Sharon organising the army of Bureau experts we have in the background who'll be answering today's questions via chat as well, or the Q&A, I should say. We have the best of the Bureau looking after today's webinar. But what are we going to talk about today? Well, in this next slide, you'll see that we have a packed hour, including a 2022 wrap-up, climate drivers, seasonal long-range forecast, and significant weather events for 2022. But let's not keep you waiting any longer and get straight to Stephanie, who will start us off with a review of what happened in 2022. Don't forget, you can get your questions answered today, so send them in as soon as you think of them. It's all yours, Stephanie.
Thank you, Jordan. I am so sorry about the technical difficulties. That was all on me. First time ever that camera dropped out, microphone dropped out, and thank you to the dear Katrina in here, our producer, for letting me use her computer at the last minute. So apologies everyone for that. So next slide, please. So we'll begin talking about the year looking at rainfall. So many of you have noticed that it was a pretty wet year last year, and it was actually the 9th wettest on record for Australia. It was also the 3rd year in a row of above average rainfall for Australia. So the graph on the left shows the annual rainfall anomaly. So this anomaly is like the difference from normal for all of Australia throughout the instrumental record. And so if we look just at the end of the graph, we can see that the last 3 years have been above average rainfall for Australia. On the top right, we have a graph of the cool season rainfall anomaly. So this is the rainfall running from April to October, looking at Southern Australia, and we can see that it was wetter than normal for Southern Australia last year, and it was actually one of the wettest cool seasons for Southern Australia on record. In the graph on the bottom right is the northern wet season, which is the October to April rainfall anomaly for Northern Australia. And we can see that the 2021 to 22 season was actually pretty close to average. Next slide, thank you. So while this was the 9th wettest year on record for Australia, this rainfall didn't occur equally throughout the country. So what this map on the right shows you is the rainfall deciles. So we can see throughout the year, rainfall was very much above average or above average in large parts of the country. But it's worth noting that several locations, such as Western Tasmania, southwestern WA, and parts of the Northern Territory, did experience below average rainfall, or in some cases, very much below average rainfall. Now, rainfall in 2022 was the wettest spring on record for the southeast. So if you look at the map at the bottom in the center, this shows the rainfall deciles for September to November in 2022. So most of the country was covered in above average rainfall or very much above average rainfall, but it's worth noting that areas of the southeast, large areas of that, particularly in the Murray-Darling Basin in New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia, had the highest on record rainfall. And as a result of this, there was significant flooding in pretty much every state of Australia at some stage in 2022. It's worth noting, though, that February to April in 2022, the rainfall was in the lowest 10% of historical records for parts of the Northern Territory and Tasmania. And you can see this in the rainfall deciles on the bottom left of the map. So moving on now to temperature. So the mean temperature, the average throughout the whole year, was 0.5 degrees above average. It was the equal 22nd warmest year on record and the coolest since 2012. So it was warmer than average, despite this being a La Nina year and a negative Indian Ocean dipole year. So while I'll discuss these in greater detail later in the presentation, both of these generally act to cool the climate. Nevertheless, it was still a warmer than average year. So this graph is showing the annual mean temperature with the La Nina marked in the blue bars, El Nino marked in the orange bars, and neutral years marked in the grey bars. So as we can see in more recent times, most of the years that were warmer than average tended to be a neutral or El Nino year. But the last couple years which had La Ninas, generally the cooler one, were still above average. Next slide, thank you. The temperature in 2022. So while the mean temperature was half a degree above average, that wasn't the case, or that varies across the country. So the top map shows the mean temperature deciles for Australia. And what we found was that generally in the northern parts of the country, temperatures were above average or very much above average. This was also the case for Victoria and Tasmania. However, parts of New South Wales had below average temperatures. But this signal was even greater when we looked in the maximum temperatures. So maximum temperatures for 2022 were 0.32 degrees Celsius above average, and this is actually the lowest since 2011. So when looking at the map, again, we have these warm and above average and very much above average temperatures in the north, along the coast of WA and in Tasmania, but large areas of New South Wales, South Australia, southern Queensland, and parts of Victoria experienced below average or very much below average temperatures. Now, in the north, we had this warm weather, and that was influenced by several severe to extreme heat waves in the tropics. So moving now to tropical cyclones. So over the 2021 to 22 season, there were 10 tropical cyclones observed in the broader Australian region, but only TC Tiffany and Annika crossed the coast at cyclone strength. And so while this was an average number of tropical cyclones, there was actually a very high number of tropical lows that also caused flooding, but didn't quite reach tropical cyclone status. So some details now. So Tropical Cyclone Tiffany did actually end up causing significant disruption to the long distance transport routes, while Annika brought high winds and heavy rain to the eastern Pilbara. There was also Tropical Cyclone Seth, which did not cross the coast at cyclone strength, but did still manage to cause severe flooding in southeast Queensland. On the next current season, so the 2022 to 2023 Tropical Cyclone Ellie crossed the top end of Northern Territory, causing significant flooding in WA, the NT, and Queensland. But this current cyclone season is still ongoing. So finally, we had sea surface temperature. So 2022 was actually the warmest year on record for the Australian region, and it was 0.8 degrees Celsius above average. And it was also the warmest year on record for the Coral Sea, which was 0.95 degrees above average. So looking at the line graph on the left, it's the annual sea surface temperature anomaly for the instrumental record. And we can see that 2022 was the highest in this very clear warming trend. Looking at the map on the right, this shows a map of the sea surface temperature deciles across the region. And what we found was that large areas, pretty much everywhere in the Australian region, experienced above average or very much above average sea surface temperatures. And there's this large area of highest on record sea surface temperatures surrounding Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, right down through Pacific, through around New Zealand, and then up to Tasmania. There's this huge area that's had highest on record sea surface temperatures in 2022. Thank you. Oh, I will now pass to David to tell us about the year in water.
Thanks, Steph. So Steph's told us that much of Australia experienced above average rainfall in 2022. So what happened after that rainfall hit the ground? This is the year in water. So soil moisture. Soil moisture is a crucial variable for plant growth, and here are two maps. Across Australia, root zone soil moisture conditions closely mirrored the rainfall conditions. So we can see that areas that received very much above average rainfall, the blue areas on the left, had very much above average soil moisture, the green areas on the right. So this describes pretty much the southeast quadrant of the Australian mainland, as well as eastern Tasmania and the Kimberley and Cape York. Stream flow. So for 2002 as a whole, stream flows were above average to highest on record across much of Australia, compared to all years since 1975. So here's a map. The highest on record are the dark blue shading, and that's 35% of the sites. It's above average for 75% of the sites. There are still some sites there below average, and that's only 7%, but still, we need to keep an eye on what's happening in southwest Western Australia, Western Tasmania, especially. That's the situation for the whole year. Let's have a look now at some individual months. Now, we had extreme multi-day rainfall in southeast Queensland and eastern New South Wales at the end of February and March. So on the left, we have February and March with maps representing stream flow. We'll touch more on those floods later, but these plots indicate how extreme the flows were. So there's a concentration of sites that report the highest flows on record in February and March. And during spring of 2022, which is the right-hand portion of this chart here, of this screen, we've got September, October, November, and December represented. We had several slow-moving low-pressure systems. We had troughs, cold fronts. We had vast amounts of rainfall, which led to the wettest spring on record in the southeast. And that can be seen, I guess, with the shading of navy blue here, representing the highest on-record flows. So how did all of this rainfall transfer to water in storage? Well, Australia overall had nearly 6% higher water volume in storage than it had at the same time last year for the continent. There's a time series plot there which shows the last 13 years of that's the pink line, and you can see that the line had an upswing towards the end of 2002. And there's a map there that shows the storage volumes as well. Greens are 100% full, blues are close to 100% full, which is a large part of southeastern Australia. Let's take a look at some particular parts of Australia. So the Murray-Darling Basin, where most of our food comes from in Australia, we only have to go back to January 2020 on this plot of Murray-Darling North. So that's the plot on the top at the right. Murray-Darling Basin South is the bottom on the right. You only have to go back to January 2020 in the north there to find water restrictions in place all through the Northern Murray-Darling Basin. All the northern regulated valleys and the Barwon-Darling and the lower Darling, they're all in stage 3 severe or stage 4 critical drought. Inflows were at record levels, record low levels. But then after wet years in 2020 and 2021 and above average summer rainfall, many major storages in the north of the Murray-Darling Basin were close to full by April of 2022. And further periods of very much above average rainfall continued across the basin for the second half of the year, and such that the conditions now are at the end of 2022 were that the storages were 100% full across the basin. Where else? Let's have a look, if the slides continue, in Queensland. So Wivenhoe is the largest storage in southeast Queensland. It went from 57% full on the 23rd of February to over 180% full 5 days later. Now, it was holding a lot of that water back to mitigate flooding along the Brisbane River. So that was well above its supply capacity. But then you look a little bit further north to central Queensland, and there's no such extreme replenishment of the water storage volumes from the Nogoa Mackenzie. So that in both systems, water levels have finished the year at a higher level than they began. And we'll look at Lake Argyle as well. This is the largest water supply storage in Australia. It was 82% full as it reached February following the monsoon rains. Then water was drawn down through the year. This is the pink sawtooth formation you see on this time series plot. And this represents the conditions at the end of 2022. It says current level there, the current level meaning the end of 2022. Today, the level of Lake Argyle is 100% full after the runoff from record rains in early January following ex-tropical cyclone Ellie, who we'll hear about a bit later. So that's the surface water storage. What's happened in groundwater? Well, at the end of 2022, more groundwater bores were classed as having above average water level than at the beginning. So there was recharge over the country. In southeastern Queensland and northern New South Wales, there was high rainfall and flooding, which led to more recharge, but also less pumping demand. But then you look in other places around the country, like Katherine up in the top end, groundwater levels in 2022 were stable or declining. I think we can pause here now, Jordan, for some questions. So I'll go back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, David, and well done to you two, Stephanie. I'd like to invite both our presenters to come back into the chat to, back into the presentation, excuse me, to start answering a couple of questions. We have one here from Claire. She has asked, what are the water storages looking like for 2023? David, you seem best placed to answer that question.
That was from Claire, was it?
Yes, it was.
Thank you very much, Claire. The water storages for 2023 are looking, well, there's more water in storage now than there was at this time last year. So that's, I guess that's a positive situation for the country in terms of population, drinking water, and for irrigation. That's across the country. Yeah, although the storages are quite full across the eastern parts of the country, a bit less full in Western Tasmania and less full in Perth, the Perth area, which is a situation that needs monitoring, but throughout most of southeastern Australia, dams are well full.
Okay, that's good to hear. If you want to ask a question, just like Claire did, it's really simple. Above your window right now, there should be some little buttons, and one should say Q&A. If you click that, you can put in something and ask a question to our presenters. They're here all day. They're ready to take your question. We want as many as possible, and we've got a whole bunch of people in the background who work at the Bureau who are well suited to answering those questions as well. This is another question that's come in from Heather. After all the rain and flooding we've had, what are the models predicting about which areas will be dry or in drought? So it's kind of one extreme to the other, and you're probably, again, best placed to answer this one, David.
Oh, I can have a go, Jordan, and perhaps Steph can help me out too. So looking ahead, the Bureau publishes long-range forecasts on our website, and the long-range forecasts look to the next month, the next 2 months, and even out to the next 3 months. So we can look at those plots at any time, and they're updated at least weekly, I believe. And latest outlooks there, I might hand to Steph to remind me and you of what the situation is. Thanks.
Thank you, David and Jordan. Well, luckily in the next component, we actually have some maps showing some of the forecasts. So I'll talk you through some of those, but a little sneak preview for a couple minutes time. Unfortunately, we're looking at some drier conditions over the next couple months. Yeah.
All right, well, let's not give the whole game away because there is a bunch more presentation to come. We've got a question for you, Steph, as well, so you might as well just stay on. Joel has asked, what triggers and signals can be used for monitoring, for bushfires to be prepared?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we want to look out for when considering whether we're at bushfire risk is considering generally some of the areas that have actually been flooded recently will likely see lots of new vegetation growth. But as we get drier seasons, a lot of this growth could potentially become fuel for bushfires. So it's definitely worth taking a look at the long range forecasts and looking to see whether you're in an area that maybe is experiencing drying. It's also worth noting that the Australasian Fire Authorities Council, or AFAC, releases a seasonal bushfire outlook that indicates whether you will be at above normal risk of bushfire potential, below normal risk, or just regular. And the next one will be released on March 2nd, so keep your eyes peeled for that.
Excellent. Okay, a little bit of a teaser for what's coming up. Stay with us, Steph, because Wei has asked, when Victoria had its cold spell a few weeks ago, was it related to Sam or just a weather blip? And I'm curious about this because in the space of a couple of days, we went from a 15 degree swing of heat to cold, from shorts to pants very quickly.
That's true, Jordan. I'm also Melbourne based, so I definitely experienced that. I'm not quite sure which weather blip you're interested in, but it's worth knowing that recently and pretty much for the last 6 months or so, we've generally been in a positive SAM phase. And so I'll talk us through how that works in the next part of the presentation. But generally, when you're in a positive SAM phase, we tend to have cooler than normal maximum temperatures around the Victorian and southeastern Australia. So perhaps it was contributing to that.
Okay. A lot of the stuff I feel like we'll have a bunch of questions for in the next Q&A segment. So we will we'll ask one more question, then we'll give you guys a chance to talk about like what's going to happen in the future, because I know a lot of people want to know about that. Before we do get into that, this is a question up for grabs. I don't really know who to direct this to, but Cameron has said, what were the main reasons for the differences in the 2021-2022 cyclone season forecast versus how it turned out? Anyone want to jump on that one? Okay, great.
Yeah, so for the 2021 to 2022 forecast, we predicted an average to slightly above average of number of tropical cyclones in the Australian region. So last season we had 10, and the long-term average of tropical cyclones is 11. But in recent decades, it's actually been a bit closer to 9. So did actually quite well with our prediction of average to slightly above average.
Does the office get really excited when they get the predictions right? I mean, like cyclones are very important. There's no joke here, but I just wonder, like, are they like, wow, when we get that prediction so close, or are you expecting it?
It's a little pat on the back, I think.
Let's jump into the next section now. Our final Q&A session will be coming up in just a bit, so there's going to be plenty more time for your questions there. Remember, if you want to get them into us, just above you, you should see a Q&A button. It's a little speech bubble with a question mark in it. Click that, start sending them in, because I know we're going to have a bunch coming up for the next part. Right now, though, Stephanie is going to talk to us, about what influenced the climate during 2022.
Thank you, Jordan. So we're just getting the slides ready. All right, so I'm talking you through what influenced the climate in 2022. Now, as previously suggested, we were in a La Nina this year. So the way La Nina works is that you generally have trade winds that blow across the Pacific Ocean, right near the equator. And what they do is they started blowing stronger than usual. And as a result, we ended up having this cooler than normal water that lives off the coast of South America being blown out across the equatorial Pacific Ocean. And that also meant that we ended up getting a nice big warm pool of warmer water to the north of Australia. So that's what a La Nina looks like. And as a result, we end up getting with this warmer water over Australia. The warmer water increases evaporation, increases cloud cover, and increases the water available for rain, resulting in an increased chance of rain for Australia. So typically with a La Nina, we generally get increases in rainfall in eastern, central, and northern Australia, and generally the daytime temperatures decrease to the south of the tropics. La Nina is also associated with widespread flooding, and a lot of these impacts we saw in 2022. But it's also worth noting that this was actually the third La Nina event we've had in a row. So previously we had La Ninas in 2020 to 2021, 2021 to 2022, and now 2022 to 2023. So it's not unheard of to have 3 La Ninas in a row. This has previously happened a few times, most notably in 1954 to 1957, 1973 to 1976, and more recently 1998 to 2001. And what you can see is that these last 3 years that we had of La Ninas, they looked a little bit different, but generally resulted in wetter conditions for large parts of Australia. Worth noting that there is actually no instances in our records of La Nina occurring 4 times in a row. And the way the climate models are looking right now, it's unlikely that we're going to see a 4th. So not only did we have La Nina influencing our climate and bringing wetter conditions to us, we also had a negative Indian Ocean dipole. So the Indian Ocean dipole is sort of like the La Nina of the Indian Ocean. And so again, what we had was cooler than normal waters off the coast of Africa and warmer than normal waters across northern Australia. And this set up an atmospheric circulation that resulted in increased evaporation and cloud cover over northern Australia, which then increases the chance of rain. And as you can see in the diagram on the left, there's an increased chance of rain across large parts of southern Australia. So the map on the right demonstrates some of the typical impacts when we have a negative Indian Ocean dipole, which is a lot more rainfall, particularly in southeastern Australia during winter and spring. And this was what we definitely saw in 2022. Next slide, thank you. But not only did we have a La Nina making things wet, a negative Indian Ocean dipole making things wet, but we also had the SAM, another climate driver, coming to the party with its wet mode. So what the SAM is it looks at the westerly winds, these winds that blow between Australia and Antarctica, and these winds often bring rain-bearing weather systems and some cold fronts, and the southern annular mode describes how this band of winds between Australia and Antarctica moves north and south. So a positive phase is when this band of winds has moved further south. And what happens in terms of the climate in spring and summer is that this actually means more rainfall because all this moisture from the tropics can come down and get rain-bearing systems from the east as well, come in and cause wetter conditions for a lot of southeastern Australia, but notably less rainfall in Western Tasmania. And then again, this is what we saw occurring in 2022, which is why we had such an extremely wet year, particularly in the second half. Next slide, thanks. So now is a little bit of a look into some of the long-range forecasts. So this information is available, as David mentioned earlier, on our website in the Outlooks component. So what I'm showing here is the March to May long-range forecast, and it's the chance of above median. So on the left, we have rainfall. And so basically, autumn is likely to be drier than median across much of the country, with the strongest chances in southern WA and in the interior. Looking at the maximum temperature in the centre and the minimum temperature on the right, we can see that the autumn maximum temperatures are likely to be above average across much of the country except the inland tropics. And the minimum temperatures are likely to be warmer in the coastal parts of Australia and Tasmania. Looking even further ahead, this is what I was referring to before, this rainfall map for April to June. This is a prediction of the chance of above median rainfall. And so this is very different to the sort of maps and predictions we were making last year. But this time, we're expecting drier than median conditions for April to June across most of the country. We're also expecting warmer than normal days across most of the country, except in the inland tropics, and warmer nights around the southern coastal regions and Tasmania, but cooler than normal nights in central Australia and northwest WA. And now I will pass you back to David, who will talk through some of the significant events of 2022.
Thanks very much, Steph. Yes, well, we've seen and heard about the climate Australia experienced in 2022, and we have a sense of how it ranked in the historic record. We know about La Nina and the Indian Ocean Dipole and the Southern Annular Mode. So now I'm going to take us briefly through 8 events from 2022 where the land and its people felt significant impacts. 8, that's a good number. So we'll start in February with extreme rainfall. Now, we had a slow-moving low-pressure trough. It's brought heavy rain to southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales. That was in the 22nd of Feb. And we had widespread major flooding across the area. So the Mary River at Gympie reached its highest level since 1893. The Brisbane River went past the 2013 flood level in Brisbane City. Lismore flooded, beat the previous record by over 2 metres. The gauge was washed away and the town was inundated. So we also saw flooding along the Tweed. This was extreme rainfall. It's a photo there of a flooded street in Lismore. Second, we'll look in March. So following this heavy rainfall of late February, we had an east coast low in early March, which brought further heavy rain to coastal New South Wales. It was a similar situation to what we saw in March of 2021, a year earlier, but soils and catchments in March 2022 were already very wet and the storages were already close to full. So there was not much capacity to hold water, which meant much more water became floodwater. There was major flooding observed for parts of Sydney, including the Hawkesbury Nepean, North Richmond and at Windsor. We can see photos here downstream of Windsor and at Windsor itself. And another east coast low later in March brought further widespread rainfall and more flooding. On the 28th of March, we had storms and heavy rain on the Gold Coast. Lismore residents were evacuated again as water entered the city for the second time in a month. The rainfall chart on the right there for the week of the 3rd to the 9th of March. And if you can remember that time and you lived in Sydney or Wollongong, you would have got pretty wet. In March, we also had a heat wave. So what is a heat wave? Question. Heat wave occurs anywhere when the maximum and minimum temperatures are unusually hot over a 3-day period. So severe and extreme heat waves are very important because they've actually claimed more lives than any other natural hazard in Australia. And they're dangerous because they pose a health risk to the old and the very young. But from late February into the middle of March, we had heat wave, severe to extreme heat wave in northern coasts of Queensland, northern and central coasts, and the March temperature records were broken across the Northern Territory, Queensland and Western Australia. Fourth event. We're in May now, and we're talking flooding in Queensland. You can probably remember this if you're up there because we had exceptional rainfall over large parts of Queensland in May. It was Queensland's wettest May since 1989, and the 5th wettest May on record for Queensland. We had widespread rain in the middle from about the 11th to the 14th, with many sites in that part of Queensland breaking their daily totals, records for daily totals in May. We had flooding across the central northern tropics. There's two charts here. One of the rainfall percentages. That's a percentage of the monthly average. So we're up to 200, 300, 400% of the monthly average, and a map of catchments that were under flood warning, and it was a serious situation in May in Queensland. Fifth event, flooding, another flooding example. This was a very wet year, as we know. So after the flooding of March 2022 and March 2021, we had another East Coast low, which brought several days of heavy rain, very heavy rain, to areas around Sydney in early July. It was the wettest July on record for Greater Sydney. And here's a chart at the top right there, again, of percentages of monthly rainfall. And there's a great big purple blob there and on the Sydney part of the New South Wales coast. Well, in fact, most of the New South Wales coast is an area that received more than 4 times the monthly average rainfall. We had a natural disaster declared due to the major flooding of the Hawkesbury and Nepean River and many other catchments along the New South Wales coast. The dot point there suggests July rainfall 4 to 8 times above the monthly average. And a photo of someone fetching food in a little tinny. Event number 6, spring rainfall in the Murray-Darling Basin. You might have got an appreciation for this already, but spring rainfall was the highest on record for the Murray-Darling Basin in New South Wales and Victoria and almost the rest of Australia. But in the middle of September, we had deep low pressure system well south of the Great Australian Bight. That was associated with complex system of cold fronts and troughs across Southeast Australia. We had cloud, we had embedded thunderstorms, we had heavy rainfall, and all of this meant river levels across inland New South Wales and southern Queensland that were already high became, well, they were unable to cope with the deluge of rain. And by late September, we had an offshore low which brought more onshore flow and locally intense rainfall around the northern coastal New South Wales into southeast Queensland. We had rivers flooding into the top of the Darling, and in the first week of October we had further rain. It just kept coming. Throughout October we had low pressure systems across the southern and eastern Australia, and they connected with the tropical air Steph was talking about. So that's air's laden with moisture from the north, and that brought intense rainfall that we don't usually see in the southern parts, all down through New South Wales and Victoria. So storms and prolonged heavy rain over parts that don't normally see it. And a very large number of stations set daily rainfall records, not just monthly, but the daily rainfall record because of the intensity of the rain between the 20th and the 27th of October. Doesn't normally fall that quickly. Number 6. That will mean number 7's next. And it follows on because this one is about the flooding in the Murray-Darling Basin and Victorian catchments. We could also say New South Wales catchments here, and Tasmanian too. By mid-October, when this low pressure system linked up with the tropical moisture, we saw widespread major flooding. There were evacuations across New South Wales, such as Forbes. We had evacuations across Victoria, including at Shepparton, and also in the Melbourne suburbs, which join Sydney's flooded suburbs, such along the Maribyrnong River in Melbourne. And these plots here give us some time series indications of water levels as they rose and fell over this period. So the top we have, on the top right, we have the flood level of the Murray River at Echuca, and where it rises gradually throughout the first part of that plot. That's sort of a background wet period of 2022, and then it starts to rise very steeply, and that was the Campaspe River in flood, and it got to just about major flood level at Echuca, and then the Murray waters reached Echuca, and it slowly rose to well above the major flood level while the sandbags were placed, and residents were on that knife's edge waiting to see how high the water would get before it started to recede. And the bottom plot is similar time period, but this is for the Goulburn River at Shepparton, which rose extremely quickly and then fell. Of course, that water then flowed onto Echuca. So that was no joy for the people of Echuca. The map on the right is an indication of catchments in flood warning. Red is a major flood warning catchment. Yellow or orange is a moderate flood warning, so the river's not quite so high. And green is minor flood warning, just a snapshot in time. Over days and weeks and months, we saw these waters move into the Murray. All of these rivers on the coastal side of the ranges, anyway, move into the Murray River eventually, where we saw flooding in South Australia as well. And final event, Tropical Cyclone Ellie, we've chosen here. So Tropical Cyclone Ellie developed just off the Northern Territory coast in the Joseph Bonaparte Gulf there on the 22nd, just before Christmas, and it crossed the shore near Wadia as a tropical cyclone category 1. And on the 23rd, it was a tropical low as it moved inland over the territory and over towards Western Australia. And when it got towards Western Australia, it reconnected with some of this moist monsoonal air and became more intense. And by the 30th of December, we saw widespread in heavy falls, flash flooding. We saw road closures, riverine flooding, community isolation. We saw thunderstorms around Fitzroy Crossing and Halls Creek. The Great Northern Highway was closed. And by now, ex-tropical cyclone Ellie brought the wettest December days on record to parts of the Kimberley, including at Gibb River, which has 100 years of data. You might have seen pictures of the Fitzroy River at Fitzroy Crossing wiping away that bridge, which caused enormous transport difficulties for the north. Now, it was a very big year, and I think with that, Jordan, we can go back to you for further questions.
Great, thank you, David. That was a really great in-depth look at what's been happening and a lot of information on the entire annual climate statement for 2022. A lot to take in there, which means a lot of questions. So I'd like to invite both presenters to join us again for our final Q&A. Again, this is a great and last opportunity for you to ask any of them your burning questions. So now is the time to send them in. Before we start, Steph, did you hear the collective joy when you mentioned that it's more unlikely than likely that we would have another La Nina? I think I heard it across the land as soon as you mentioned it.
Well, just don't mention El Nino though.
Yes, there you go. It does mean that everyone's on the clock. You got 12 months for your summer bods. Just as a warning, I've got to work on mine. Steph, we're going to keep you on the line while you're here. Bob has asked a question. He wants to know, when will La Nina finish? Speaking of La Nina.
Speaking of La Nina, so the La Nina is currently declining right now. We usually look at La Nina in two ways. We look at indicators in the ocean, so look at how the temperature is changing across the Pacific Ocean, and we also look in the atmosphere. So the ocean indicators of La Nina have really backed off and are pretty much in neutral territory right now, but the atmospheric indicators are still showing some La Nina signals.
Okay. Speaking with the La Nina, El Nino, as soon as people find out that I work at the Bureau, the first thing they talk about is La Nina and El Nino because it's become such a thing now. I don't even, like, I started working in 2019, never heard of it before. Now I'm here, that's all I hear about. Everybody's asking me about it, your cousins, your uncle, your grandmas, and Helen. They want to know whether there is a chance of a switch to an El Nino now during 2023. Is that possible?
It's certainly possible. I think we should also thank the comms team at the Bureau for helping spread the love about El Nino and La Nina and helping educate everyone. So what we are doing is we are constantly assessing the atmosphere in the ocean, looking for signs of La Nina declining and El Nino ramping up. And so it's still a little bit too early to tell, but take care and take note that the Bureau is monitoring constantly, and we provide updates fortnightly as part of the Climate Driver update. It's released every 2 weeks. The next one will be on Tuesday, and that usually has an indication of whether we will be transitioning into El Nino, or as the La Nina declines, more information regarding that. So don't worry, as soon as we know, you'll know too. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, and that is a great newsletter. And I am just saying that because I have a hand in making it. You can go to our website and sign up for all our great emails that we send out all the time about all different topics to do with weather. Charlotte would like to know, and I think we'll stay with you for this one, Steph, reading it. Are we likely to continue alternating between drastically different weather seasons like La Nina or El Nino in years to come? Because there is an option of just neither, right? Are we seeing the decline of the neutral phase and it's just either one or the other, or do we still have that mix?
We still have the mix. So the neutral phase actually happens in around half of all years. And generally, it takes about 4 to 7 years to swing between El Nino and La Nina. So as we've just seen recently, we have had 3 La Ninas in a row, but it's not super common. So it is normal and part of the natural variability of the climate that we expect to have El Ninos and La Ninas and neutral conditions into the future.
Okay, we're going to move off the ENSO now and go to David with a question from Tara, who's asked, do you have any flood modeling that incorporates climate change forward projections?
Thanks for the question, Tara. So a high level answer would be yes, we do. And a more detailed answer though would be that there's different models for different uses that the Bureau has. So the flood warning models, for instance, where we say the Goulburn River at Shepparton will reach X meters by Tuesday, they're flood event models, and they're used for from 0 to 4 days probably. So they're not taking climate change into account, they're taking the rainfall event as it's happened. Other parts of the Bureau look at streamflow forecasts into the future, and those are published online regularly as well. They take into account rainfall projections into the future. So what the rainfall's doing under different scenarios of climate, the streamflow will be responding to that. And at a higher level again, I think looking at sort of planning and forward prediction sort of sense, the Australian Climate Service was certainly something that will be looking at that, because that was established by the Australian government in 2021, the Australian Climate Service, and it's been guided by recommendations from the Royal Commission into National Natural Disaster Arrangements, and that's made up of the Bureau of Meteorology, Geoscience Australia, CSIRO, and Bureau of Statistics, and together we're going to be investigating where are the areas of concern, where are the pinch points in population, in planning, in climate, in flooding, for the future.
Okay. Not to confuse everybody and switch between some things that we've just been speaking about, I did mention about those emails that we do send out every week, every day, whatever the frequency, depending on the email. And there has been a comment that we've pinned to the top of the Q&A with a link there that you can sign up to straight away. Staying with you, David, and I hope I'm saying this name right, Himanshu, I'm sorry if I've gotten that wrong, has asked, do you have a view on how much Australian floods in recent years are attributed to climate change?
Thanks, Himanshu, for that question. Well, I think we'll just talk about what we know rather than views about things. But what we know is that Australia's climate has warmed on average by 1.47 degrees Celsius, but since 1910 and between 1910 and 2021. And we know that we've always had flooding, and other floods getting worse or more frequent. That's something we can look into as well. And as to how floods whether they're getting worse, that's to do with many things, including the intensity of the rainfall, the length, the duration of the rainfall, where people are living and putting their houses. There's a lot to consider here, but we do also know that in both northern and southern Australia, observations show an increase in the intensity of short duration heavy rainfall events. And that's happening as the climate's changing.
Okay, well, I'd like to stay on that topic actually, David, because we've got a question from Jesse who said, are we following expected climate change trends in all or any regions, particularly in the tropics? Because you did mention it does matter on where people live, so I thought this might be a good follow-up for that.
Oh yeah, thanks. Thanks, Jordan. And thanks for the question. I forget who that was again.
Jesse.
Jesse, thanks, Jesse. Well, I'm not too sure. I don't want to say anything that I'm not too sure about here, but I would say that the background warming trend that we see can only be explained by human influence on the global climate. Yeah, I think I'm not sure of the tropics in particular, so I can perhaps take that question on notice and we can answer it in the chat afterwards. Is that possible, Jordan?
Absolutely. Sorry to stump you there. I
okay.
will say that some of these questions, it is difficult to answer these off the top of your head. So if you have a really in-depth question that you'd like better answer for or a longer answer, we do have an email that we do have for any question that you ever have. If you're lying in bed at night and go, why does this happen? weatherquestions@bom.gov.au. Only weather related, obviously. If you're lying in bed thinking about other stuff, we can't help you there. So unfortunately, that is all the time we have for questions today. There was a lot of information to take in earlier. So if you did miss the start, David, would you please summarize about what we spoke today and what we spoke about today, excuse me, and where to find more information?
Sure. Thanks, Jordan. Well, today, folks, we've learned that 2022 was wetter and warmer than average for Australia. We've learnt that it was the 9th wettest year on record for Australia. We've learnt that it was the wettest spring on record for the Murray-Darling Basin, for New South Wales and Victoria. We've learnt that while it was 0.5 degree warmer than average, 2022 was still the coolest year since 2012. Water storage levels are high, with some exceptions, important exceptions, and that sea surface temperatures for the Australian region were the highest on record. Now, for further information, we'll stick up a whole lot of links here that include links to the Outlook maps, the long-range forecasts we were speaking of, the climate drivers, which is the ENSO and the Indian Ocean Dipole and the Southern Annular Mode and so on. The seasonal streamflow forecasts, it's all here. I don't need to read those out. The water storages as well. It's exciting. We've got so much information up there. I'll hand back to you now, Jordan.
Yeah, and don't worry about scribbling down those links. If you've attended today or you've registered for this webinar, you are going to receive a link that does have this whole presentation in, so you can look at it again, and the video to this presentation. So a lot of different bits and pieces there. Thank you, David. If you would like more information on your favorite platform, why don't you connect with us on our social media, our blog, or our excellent BOM Weather app, which now has notifications. You can subscribe to receive updates direct to your inbox about everything the team have talked about today, including information on upcoming webinars. Well, that brings us to the end of today's webinar. Thank you for all your questions, and we will keep trying to work through as many as we can in the chat, even after the webinar's over. But for the ones we didn't get to, or for more in-depth questions, we always have our email, weatherquestions@bom.gov.au. We try to improve on every webinar as well, so we do want your feedback. A link to a short survey is in the chat now. We'll pin it at the top, and we'd be really grateful if you could complete that anonymously for us. It only takes a couple of minutes. A big thank you to Stephanie and David for your time in developing the content and sharing your knowledge with us, and also to Katrina, Sharon, Falguni, Andrew, Lynette, Masood, Sky, and Jonathan for moderating in the chat. I told you we had an army of people in the background today, a big group. And to you, thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the session, and we do hope you'll join us again next time. And like I mentioned earlier, the session has been recorded. The video will be sent to you in the next few days via email. Once again, we thank you for your time. So sorry about the technical issues at the start. We look forward to seeing you again soon, and goodbye.